Welcome, everyone, to Array Global's February monthly workshop, where we're excited to have everyone here with us today. You will notice that there's someone who's missing today, and he would have liked to be here, Dr. Ray. He's out on vacation, sitting on the beautiful beach in Hawaii, but he sends his love and just his greetings to all of you, and he'll be back with us next month. I'm joining you from Dubai, so if any of you are in Dubai, you should look me up, and happy to come and visit with you. I'm only here for one more day. We had a great conference today. The Copperstone put on a wonderful workshop at the American University of Dubai, and there were hundreds of people, well over 600 people who were in attendance. So just happy to be in the area, in a warm area, because back home it's very cold, -10 or so Celsius, and with some snow. So a short break to a warm area is just wonderful to have a little break in the summertime. So welcome to everyone. We have some great people with us today. Before I turn the time over to Dr. Mike to introduce our presenter today, just wanted to talk about a few different things, and I will start off by sharing my screen so you can see our website. Go. We have what is most popular, our academic competition. We have three during the course of the year. And we have a writing contest in the fall, performing arts, or an art contest in the winter, and then our science fair this spring. And last year we had hundreds. We had like 1,500 students that were part of this program. So we'd like to have you and your students part of this too. So get onto our website and look at our science fair. Just click at the entry form. It's a Google form. It's really straightforward, but that's where it'll tell you all the rules for this science fair. It's free. Every student gets a certificate, and we do cash prizes also. So I'd encourage you to get on and look at that and see if it's something that your students would like to be a part of. Just a great way to really have students showcase some of the work that they are doing. Also, I'd like to talk a little bit about next month's workshop. Next month, we have an awesome workshop on technology, as technology, as everyone knows, is changing so much of what's going on in education and the world. And so we encourage you to put that on your calendar, March 15th, same time, and hope to see you during that time. And then also, a couple more things. We have a program called Me and My Community. And I think I've mentioned this in the past too. This is where your students can get recognized for doing community service. If they go out and do 20 hours over the course of the year, we will provide a certificate for them. We have an awards ceremony. We want to make sure that students are giving back, that they are learning how to empathize with other people, and they're learning the virtue of service. And so I'd encourage you to get onto our website. It's called Me and My Community. Also, we have a way to recognize some of your students every month, or a school. If you're doing something that's remarkable, or if you have a student that you want to really recognize who's doing something remarkable, get onto our website. We have something called the Student of the Month that we like to spotlight a student. And then also we like to spotlight our accredited institutions every month. If you do something amazing or had some kind of cool activity that's going on, we'd like to highlight that. So we'd encourage you to get on and submit something for that so we can post it on our social media and in our newsletters. And then also, this is the time of the year throughout the world where people are sending in applications for teacher and administrator of the year. Get onto our website and fill out and nominate someone. You can nominate yourself, but that's always a little bit strange. But get on and nominate a teacher who's done something extraordinary, someone who goes above and beyond, or an educator who is always there working hard and is building relationships with students and teachers and always is willing to give back. So I encourage you to get onto our website, check out some of our services. And if you do ever have any questions about what we provide for schools, besides accreditation, I think many of you know that that's our main focus with schools and helping schools improve and grow and develop. Please let us know. We'd be happy to meet with you and your administration. And so how this workshop goes is that I'll turn the time over to Dr. Mike. He'll give a short introduction for Dr. Jennifer. and then she will present. And during that time, we encourage you to post comments in the chat box. If you have questions, post them in the chat also. And Dr. Mike and I will interrupt Dr. Jennifer with some of those questions, especially if we see the same theme or the same thread come through the chat. That doesn't mean that you won't have a chance to raise your hand if you want to. At the conclusion, I will give some words of wisdom. That's usually Dr. Ray, who's giving a short little words of wisdom speech. But I'll have a few words of wisdom from him that he's passed along. And then we will post in the chat the survey. And that survey is the only way that we know how, if you paid attention for one, and if you were actually in attendance. And then we take that survey with your contact information and we send you the certificate on Tuesday. Many of you have gone through this many, many times with us because we've been doing this for 5 years now. And it's great because we go to many places and we're already recognizable. I'm a little bit taller in person than I am on Zoom, just so you know. I've met a few people today who first time they met me in person and realized that I'm a little bit taller than normal. So yeah, we're happy to interact with you on that way. So again, wait until the very end. That's when we post the workshop survey. And then also, as Dr. Jennifer is presenting, we will post the PowerPoint at the conclusion of the workshop too. So you can focus on what she's saying, take some notes now, but we will post it in the chat, the PowerPoint at the very end. And then also when you get the certificate, we will send you the PowerPoint link for that because it's beautiful. There's some great topics that are going to be going on today. So we encourage you to really focus in. This is going to be 50 minutes of high level intentional learning. And we're excited to have Jennifer on here. And I will turn the time over to Dr. Mike to introduce her.
Thank you, Dr. Jake. It's a pleasure to introduce Dr. Jennifer Cornell. She's one of my colleagues at Northwest Nazarene University, or I should say maybe a former colleague since I'm retired now, but she's still there doing some great work. And one of her specialties is student engagement. And that's one of the things that at Northwest Nazarene University, we focus on very hard, and that is student engagement, keeping those students engaged, keeping them involved in terms of what's going on. And Jennifer is one of the premier individuals that worked with that at our campus. And so with that, Dr. Jennifer Cornell.
Well, thank you so much for being here today and just for your time. Mike is right. I love this topic of engagement. It's very important to me as an educator, and what I've really focused on in my career. We know how important it is for student learning. And so I am going to share my screen with you and go ahead and begin our presentation. So when I was looking at this, I thought the best way to title this, and really what I'm hoping, is that we're going to go over practical strategies to engage all students. And so I know that sounds ambitious, but we are going to look at that together today. So just to give you a little bit of my own background, I've been an educator for 24 years. This is my 24th year. And I've been blessed to be able to teach and be an administrator at a variety of levels. And so when I began my career, I was an elementary teacher and I taught 5th and 6th grade. And then I moved into the middle school, which is where I spent the bulk of my teaching. I love middle school students. They are my absolute favorites. It's such a dynamic time in their life. And they are a blast to work with. So I taught 6th and 7th grade English language arts. And then I was able to also teach a few years of high school English, 9th, 10th, and 12th grade. And I really enjoyed that as well. High schoolers are a whole other level, and it was neat to be able to interact with them and to engage with them and see how they experience engagement in the classroom. I think by working at these levels, I've been able to really see developmentally what does engagement look like. So that's been really beneficial to me as an educator. And then I feel blessed to be able to share that knowledge in what I do now. I'm a university professor at Northwest Nazarene University, and I work in the education department. I get to teach my students at the beginning of their program in their intro classes for our education program. And then I'm the director of clinical practice. So I work with all the student teachers as they are concluding their program. So it's a nice bookend experience for me. And I feel like I'm able to pass along a lot of these strategies and ideas to my students, especially in their student teaching semester, when they are within the classroom and they can try to put some things into action. I've also been an administrator, so I was at the elementary and middle school levels. I've been a vice principal and a principal as well. And then I've worked in both public and private schools. So again, there's lots of different dynamics in those settings that impact engagement and what engagement looks like. And so I feel like that's helped to give me a lot of good perspective to speak to how to implement some of these strategies and the ways in which they're helpful to different groups of learners. So I have a variety of degrees. I have my bachelor's in elementary education, and then my master's and specialist and PhD in the areas of educational leadership. And so again, I feel like I've been really blessed with some good experiences, some good time in the classroom, working with lots of different people, and really having a passion for this subject of engagement. And so my objectives for us today are to discuss the challenges that we find with engagement, because let's be real, there are challenges with it. I'm sure we've all experienced. I want to examine those strategies to engage all students. And again, I did say all, so we are going to talk about what that looks like. And then I'm hoping you can leave and implement some of these practical strategies right away into your classroom. So keep in mind as I'm talking about these, trying to pick one out that you think I could take this and go in next week and try it in my classroom. So the first thing I want to talk about though is the struggle of engagement. I think we all know as teachers that there are definite struggles with how do we get our students engaged in the classroom and into the learning. We've all experienced that before. So what I want you to do in the chat, I want you to just think about your own classroom. Think about what you've been experiencing this year so far. What would you say is your biggest challenge with engagement currently, or that comes to mind for you when you think about this topic? And Jacob, you guys can chime in on anything you know you've experienced, any of those challenges that we see.
I think what a lot of us see, I know in my schools, is the challenge with engagement is technology. Kids can get so distracted with things, and technology is giving everything to them in little sound bites and short snippets that it's hard to keep them engaged because they want to stream, they want to flip through YouTube or Snapchat or anything else. So I think that's what I've seen, just
Sure,
keeping students engaged that way. But I'm interested to hear what other people say.
definitely.
Yeah. Looks like comment very distracted. They're sleepy or talkative. Probably sleepy because they're on social media or the internet or video games. I hate video games. Um, some other thoughts in the chat from Ahmed. The biggest challenge is to provide a topic that can engage all kinds of students. Yeah,
Mm.
sometimes the topic can be difficult to engage them all. And then Monad, also the first thing I think is objective is how to engage all students and keep them on track using digital tools. So she's trying to use the technology link to keep them engaged.
Yeah.
Ahmed said individual differences. Sabir says hungry all the time, especially for boys, hungry. Behavior. Philip says behavior can be, and Muhammad, out of control. Um, Marcella, the time factor. You know, time is one of our biggest gifts as an educator that we have. And sometimes we just don't feel like we have all the time. Mr. Tony
Well,
Crawford, a friend who's in Egypt. I have teachers who continue to lecture. I understand that this is their comfort zone. The challenge is to embrace student engagement. Yeah, so some of it could lie with teachers themselves.
Very
Uh,
true.
Kay Knight says language difficulties for non-English speakers, or English is a second language, I think I like to say, because, yeah, that can be difficult to have to teach in a second language all the time.
Yeah.
Some behavior things. Denver Lopez. It's challenging for students who are sleepy because of they're unable to sleep well. They stay up late, and students who didn't bring their books. Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Jane says large class sizes. We've seen that. Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
Attention span, maintaining student interest throughout the lesson, lack of interest in the lesson. Um, Islam says limited resources and attention span. Yeah, resources can be a struggle too.
True.
Antar says ADHD students who can't stay still and keep disrupting the other students. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Mhm.
troublemakers, behavior. Yeah, so I think the list goes on. It looks like
Yeah,
they're the same issues, Jennifer, Dr. Jennifer, that we deal with all the time too. We see
it's
throughout
true.
schools.
It's true. And what's interesting, some of those ones that are behaviorally connected, I think what I teach my students is that the engagement and behavior go hand in hand. And a lot of times, we want to see the behaviors decrease, but sometimes we are experiencing them because we can't necessarily engage all of our students. And so some of those behaviors start to crop up. On the flip side, with some of the activities that you choose to do, especially if they involve a lot of movement or coordination of things, you have to be explicit in setting your expectations and what the behavior should look like for those activities. So there are definite concerns and needs with behavior that you want to incorporate with anything that you do engagement wise. I was in a conference last weekend and some great discussion and learning about the brain and the young brain. And one of the things, because I know you mentioned some people are saying students are sleepy or hungry, and that definitely impacts how they engage in the content, which is very, very true. And the speaker talked about, we have Maslow's hierarchy of needs, with those basic needs, sleep, hunger, all those things have to be met before they're going to be ready to learn. And so she had a phrase that I just love. You have to Maslow before you bloom, referring to Bloom's taxonomy. And so before we can get them engaged and cognitively learning, we do have to make sure that those basic needs are being met for them. So sometimes we have to do some of that work with them first and see, okay, are you like tired, hungry, all of those kinds of things. There may be some issues going on at home. So that definitely has an impact. So there's kind of that side piece of things where if your students' basic needs aren't being met, they're going to have a harder time engaging together and engaging in the learning itself. So there is that piece to consider. But I loved what I heard on some of those pieces too. Very real issues, very real challenges with engagement. Some of what I heard was the relevancy of the content or how they connect to it, it being interesting, all of those kinds of things. Some of it having to do with technology pieces, which are all very fair challenges. I know for me, I think I mentioned I taught English, mainly English language arts, both middle and high school. And I always felt like I was battling against the science teacher who was going to make everything super cool, blow things up, experiments, like all that kind of stuff. They would always come, especially sixth graders, would always come to my classroom and be like, oh, we did this in science. And I said, you know what? English can be cool too. And yet it can be hard for kids to be excited about reading and writing. I always was, but it's not the case for everybody. So I always looked for ways in which I could make the content accessible and then also something they wanted to pursue and engage in, which is a challenge. So when I was in my career, I wish I would have had this earlier on. But I discovered through some work that my school was doing when I was teaching high school, we learned about total participation techniques. And this is a book, and there's been a lot of professional development around it, a lot of resources out there. Priscilla and William Himmeley, they're a husband and wife, and they developed this book about making every student an active learner in 2017. And it actually came out of some work they were doing around how to make learning engaging and meaningful for multilingual learners. And so a lot of these strategies they have in their book actually help differentiate and use strategies that you do want to use with multilingual learners. So that was a challenge that was mentioned. And so hopefully, as we're going through this, you're going to see some things with the use of a lot of visuals, a lot of ways in which your multilingual learners can access the learning. And so that's what this kind of came out of, and then it became its own thing. And so what I love about it is that it really does look at how to get every student engaged in the learning. And so this is a quote out of their book. It says that total participation techniques, TPTs is what they're referred to, are teaching techniques that allow for all students to demonstrate at the same time active participation and cognitive engagement in the topic being studied. And what I love about this is it's not just being active. I think sometimes we can get caught in the trap of, I want to be engaging, and so that just means moving. That's not necessarily the case. We'll talk about some strategies that do involve movement. But I think almost more importantly is the cognitive engagement. And one of the things that we teach in our program, the Danielson framework for teaching. It is what the state of Idaho uses as their evaluation instrument. Many states in our country do use it, and it just provides a framework to understand what is good teaching. And in the instructional domain, it talks about student engagement. And it talks about how it's not only hands-on, but it has to be minds-on learning. And part of what Himily and Himily want to emphasize is we have to help them grow and develop those cognitive muscles so that they are coming out with that well developed and not just surface level learning. So that's a challenge. They talk about the high cost of disengagement that's happening. And unfortunately, and I think somebody mentioned this when we talked about the challenges, we can treat our students as what they refer to in the book as listening objects. And I find myself, when I'm in my classes and I find myself doing this, I almost step back and like, oh, I'm making them a listening object. And it's the tried and true stand and deliver approach. And so unfortunately, sometimes if that's the only instructional technique that we are using, we've all seen when we do that, you can tell the glazed over looks that happen, the in one ear and out the other, where that's not sticking with them. And so inadvertently, they just become passive listeners and they're not engaging with the content itself. They also noted that the problem of kids dropping out of school, every 9 seconds, a student drops out, and a fifth of our students in our country are dropping out. And when they looked at and studied what are the reasons, there are a variety of them, but one of the top reasons was boredom and irrelevance of school. And so that connects directly to engagement. Students were not feeling that they were being challenged or engaged in the content, and they weren't connecting it to themselves and their lives. And so part of engaging is helping them make those connections and the relevance of the material. This probably is not new information for you. I'm sure you've heard it before, but it was a good reminder for me. They looked at the retention of information after 24 hours. So if all we do is lecture and they are those listening objects, after 24 hours, they're only going to be retaining 5% of what we told them, which hurts the heart a little bit because we want to think that what we are sharing is just golden wisdom of information. But if that's all they're doing, they're not going to retain it as well. I know when I was teaching English and I was in the high school age groups teaching, it always surprised me that I was still reviewing what verbs and nouns and adjectives and adverbs were at that point. But not that I knew my colleagues had taught them and they had learned this. However, the retention of that wasn't necessarily there because they may not have been able to apply it in a deeper way. If they're just reading the content, which is better, they're maybe hearing and reading, they're going to retain 10% of it. If they get to talk about it, definite improvement. They're going to retain 50% through discussion. But where you get the most bang for your buck is 90% of retention will happen if they can immediately use the information, work with it, and then ideally teach it to others. And again, I think these are things we've heard before, but we don't always remember that in when we're intentionally planning what we're going to do with students. So another interesting thing they included in the book is the student experience. So Alexis Wiggins is the daughter of Grant Wiggins, an education guru that's since passed away. But in 2014, she did a blog post that then got picked up by the Washington Post. She shadowed a student for a couple of days. So she did the student experience. And what she found is, students, they are sitting all day. And sitting is exhausting. And if you've been to some professional development or workshops, if all you do is go and sit and listen and you're a listening object, that's exhausting. You come away tired. High school students were sitting and passively listening in 90% of their classes. And then there was also this feeling that they felt like a nuisance to their teacher if they wanted to ask questions or they were being told, you need to listen, you need to be on task, you need to be doing this. So some of that environmental piece just made them disengage from things. So we have to, it just speaks to, we have to be intentional in what we're doing to get them actively engaged with that hands-on and minds-on learning. So Himali and Himali developed this quadrant of that talks about the levels of participation in thinking. And so you may move through some of these quadrants in a lesson or a unit, but there is a danger in getting stuck in only staying in some of these lower quadrants. And so we're going to talk through what each of these are and where they fit. So you can see you have lower order thinking to higher order and low participation to high participation. So in that first quadrant, quadrant 1, you have lower cognition happening. So a lot of what you're doing is at that lower level of blooms, which again, that's not bad. There are foundational things you need to do in that lower level of blooms and remembering and recall. But then if you're in this quadrant, when you're doing that, you also may be experiencing low student participation. So at this level, this is kind of where you might have some basic questions of things, but it's not getting any feedback from students, little participation. So you aren't seeing evidence that they're processing the information. Therefore, you don't know how long is this really going to stick? And is it being perceived as relevant? Are they seeing it as relevant, or is it a situation of in one ear and out the other? Now, if you move up a quadrant, you may get higher participation, but it's still not pushing them to higher levels of thinking. So again, these activities definitely have their place and need to be utilized. Typically, you would see something like this when you're reviewing information. It might give them a little opportunity to apply. So think in terms of a math facts review and some more quick fire comprehension type review, maybe a game. So you have a lot of kids giving you answers and participating, but they're not having to do much with the information other than tell it back to you. And so it's not usually linked to anything requiring deeper thinking. So again, they may memorize it for the purpose of, like, if there's a test coming, but often then that information is going to go away. So when we get into quadrant 3, okay, we're now better on the cognition. We have higher order thinking questions happening, discussion questions, but there is low participation. And so really this is when we have the situation where we may only target a few students who know the answers and they're always the ones participating. But in this quadrant, we're not having strategies that are going to engage all the students. So you may be doing better trying to get them to work with the information in a higher order critical thinking way. But the tools you're giving them to do it and the way you're going about it is not letting them all access it necessarily. So what they talk about is we want to try to circle into quadrant 4 as much as we can. And this is where you're going to have both things happening, high cognition and high participation. So your questions are pushing them into blooms. So they may have to analyze something or evaluate. They may have to justify thinking, but you're going to do this in ways that have all students engaging. And you do want to try to move into this periodically through the lesson. you're not necessarily going to be at this quadrant 4 all the time, every single thing that you do. But we really should be trying to get our students there as they are scaffolding up in their learning and learning about concepts and then applying them, because we want them to be able to then apply them across contexts and in different situations, ideally. So it's not just, I need to learn these facts to pass this test, but you want to then, how does this apply to real life and real world situations? And why do I think what I think? And why does Johnny think what he thinks? And we should talk about this together, and we should maybe sway one another. Maybe I can get him to think what I'm thinking. So some of those ways that they can get higher order thinking and more participation.
So, Dr. Jennifer, can I interrupt just quickly about that?
Totally.
Because that quadrant, it just kind of blows my mind. It just seems just awesome to be able to look at. And how do you see teachers use it when they're creating a lesson plan? Do
Mhm.
you recommend that they go in and look at and say, okay, where does this fall in? Or after the lesson plan and they're doing a reflection, do they go in and see that? Or as an administrator, because we have some administrators on, is that another way to go in and give feedback to teachers and say, hey, you're a little bit in quadrant 3. You're only
Yeah.
really focusing on a few. So yeah, how do you see schools using the quadrants? Because I really, really like it. There's a lot of good comments on there of people wanting it now. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's good. I think you can use it in all of those ways that you just talked about. So, when you look at it, when you are planning ahead, because part of what we do as educators is we do need to be intentional in what we plan. And so part of that intentionality is you can look at what's the purpose of the lesson that I'm going to be doing. And with that purpose, what quadrant do I want to try to be in? I think that we can probably all say we don't want to be in one. There's generally not a spot where we would say, yes, let's stay in quadrant 1. Um, I would say there can be an argument for, okay, we're going to do some of quadrant 2, just because I want to do a little review and get kids like brains primed for when we're going to try to do more and move into quadrant 4. Again, 1 and 3 are those areas of we're just not quite, that's not going to get you where you need to be with students. So I think you can look at it in your planning and see, where do I want to use some strategies that I'm going to talk about here in a minute for quadrant 4? But it can also be reflective, because you can go back and say, wow, I planned that lesson and I actually probably could have pushed into quadrant 4 here and I didn't. Or I tried to do that and that really flopped. So I think it can be used on the front end and on the back end,
Yeah.
either way. But it's just a really good way to analyze what you're doing and how you're doing it with kids.
Love it. Yeah, it's such a great tool. I think that teachers can take this now, and as
Yeah,
they're developing lessons for Sunday, because Sunday's the first day of the week for some of the countries we're in, or Monday for those
yeah,
countries, and they can immediately use that as
yeah.
they're implementing their instructional strategies and implementing their curriculum. Love it.
Yeah, and that's what I love about TPTs is they're very easy to use and just take right away and do. It doesn't take a whole lot. So just a refresher, I mean, Bloom's taxonomy, I'm sure this is not new to anybody. This is something I provide my students when we look at how we develop good learning outcomes. And this helps us know when I'm saying I want my students to analyze or evaluate, like, what does that mean? What are they going to be doing? What will they demonstrate? And so this is a good reference tool to help you as you're designing quadrant 4 activities that you can do of how do I want to get them into higher order thinking. It can be as simple as I want them to evaluate, so they're going to need to defend their point of view. And so that definitely takes it into a higher order thinking rather than just saying, this is what I think, which is great, but now defend it. And so that pushes our students a little bit further. So I have another question for you. If we were all in a room together, we'd be doing this and we'd be moving around with some of the strategies I talked about. But what can you notice? I want to talk about questioning and discussion a little bit that I referred to in some of the earlier slides. What do you notice can tend to happen when you throw out a question to your whole class? So imagine you are in doing direct instruction, whole group instruction, and you throw out a question to your students, like my question of, what's a challenge that you see in engagement if we were all in a room together? Now, if you think in terms of your students, What are some things you've seen happen with that scenario?
And then don't be bashful because we've all done it as educators, right?
And it's totally fine if because I can almost guess what happens for a lot of
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
Well, and in fact, what happens is exactly happening. Very few people are actually responding to that question right now. There's a
Right.
few. Some will be active and excited. Some smart students will answer. Slow learners will be left behind. A lot of noise. But as people, generally, when we do those open-ended questions like that to the whole group, the people that want to be quiet will stay quiet, and the people that want to talk and take over things will talk. And I saw this even with my graduate students.
Yes. I see it with my university students still, so it happens. But that's exactly right. And a lot of times, so I want to talk about the beach ball versus the ripple. So these are two concepts they talked about in the book, and what can tend to happen and what I pictured in my mind and what has happened to me is the beach ball method, where a question is tossed out to students, and a student catches it, metaphorically, and they'll answer. And they'll toss back the answer to you. So it's very one directional between you and one student, and then the cycle will repeat itself. Now, in my experience, a lot of times it's only a few students that are actually doing that. And what Mike talked about in those scenarios is very true. And what I've found, and even in here in our online session, there's a hesitancy for students to want to share what they're thinking with a big group. And even if it's just been like 10 students, to put yourself out there and share, this is my answer to this, there's a risk in that. Now, we all know we want to set up good environments in our classroom, safe environments where students can share. So even if you've done that, though, sometimes that what can be like the cold call approach can not give you as much response as if you implement what they call the ripple method. And so this is exactly if anybody's ever thrown a pebble into a pond and you see it ripple out. That's what you want to think about here. So the first ripple, what they call the entry point into the discussion, begins with every student responding to a prompt. And that is usually in writing. Okay. Now, for younger students, it can be drawing a picture. Okay. That then they're going to explain. But typically, everybody, and it's a quick write, I use this a lot. They'll have a prompt to respond to. Not long, and they're not writing pages of information. It's a quick response. But this gives them an opportunity to process their thoughts and write them down. The second ripple is when you have them share that response in a small group, or it could just be a partnership, like a turn to your elbow partner. A lot of times, though, I will have them get with a couple of people. This is a little safer because a lot of students feel more comfortable. Okay, I'll share with these two other people. That's fine. And they'll share out. So you've got everybody talking about what they think. The third ripple is then that whole class sharing, where then you ask from there, who can share with me how you responded to this? Now, I still try to structure this in a safe way to give them options where I tell them, okay, I'm going to call on, different people. You can share your thought or a thought that one of your group members articulated that you thought was just awesome. So it doesn't have to be them even still sharing what they put. They can share what somebody else said. Um, and so it still builds in a little bit of safety. But in this, you've had every student participating. Every student wrote something. Every student had a chance they talked to someone. And so you will walk away with, I collect those quick writes, and I have then evidence of their learning and their processing and thinking. So it's a very quick and easy way to make sure that they're all participating in the thinking. So that's what they talk about the beach ball method versus the ripple method and how we want to try to implement that ripple method within what we do. Again, not every single question that you ask. Oftentimes, I talk with my students, even with the beach ball method, I've told them if you get just hearing silence and crickets, do a turn and talk. Talk to your neighbor real quick, 30 seconds, just trying to get that going for them. So I want to talk about, I'm not going to talk about every strategy in the book. We would be here forever. But I highlighted a few and I just want to show you how it's all set up. So in the book, which if you have a chance to get it, it's amazing. Super usable right off the bat. But they set it up where when they talk about a strategy, everyone has this structure. They'll tell you how it works. They will tell you how to ensure higher order thinking. And then they do a pause to apply where they have you think through questions and things of, okay, how would this look in my classroom? So that you can take it and use it. So I've mimicked that in what I'm going to go over. So the first section that they talk about are called on the spot TPTs. And so these are ones that are easy just to pull out. They don't take a lot of preparation, honestly. And so on their website, they have the picture that I pulled. People have posted how when they've used different things in their classroom. So they put this on their website. So I thought that was fun to take a look at. So all of these are considered on the spot TPTs. I think many of us have done Think, Pair, Share. That's a very common one and a great one to use. Like I said, I use quick writes a lot. So it's a prompt they respond to. I give them 3 to 4 minutes. It's not a long amount of time, even if it's just give me one sentence. Quick draws are great, especially for younger grades, like I said. I'm going to talk specifically about Chalkboard Splash. And another one that I've used that was really powerful was ranking. This was one, and that's the picture that you see here that I posted. But when I did ranking, this causes them to examine and evaluate the importance of some things and rank order them, and then explain their thinking. And so for my students, I took one of our domains in the Danielson framework that talks about all the components that make up good professionalism in a teacher. And I had them on strips of paper, and they had to, as a group, rank order what's the most important to the least important in your opinion. And then they walked around with their groups and saw what other groups did. And there were differences. And so then we sat afterwards and I had each group explain, why'd you rank them like you did? And then they debated and tried to sway each other to change their rankings. And so it involves some movement, but it really involved that higher order thinking process too. The one I use a ton is called Chalkboard Splash. And really, I mean, chalkboard, whiteboard, chart paper, whatever you use. But it's called Chalkboard Splash. And that picture is actually my students doing that. And I put the question, how does planning impact instruction both positively and negatively? And so you have a sentence starter. They go around on whiteboards and they write their response to the question. That's the first round. Then the second round, I have them walk around. All this is done silently. And they respond. What you're seeing here is they're responding to peers. And so they put a response of an agreement or a difference of opinion, or have you thought about this, or a question they might have. And after they do that, I have them get in small groups and talk about what did you see in themes, similarities, differences in the responses. And then we talk all together and we share out about that. So again, they're analyzing. It's not only responding to that prompt and sharing their thinking, but it's analyzing what they see in each other's responses too and responding to one another. So for you, consider some sentence starters you might use for this and let them have those ways they can go around and make their thinking visible and respond to each other. Now, with all of these, I always tell my students, you need to make sure you have good explicit behavior expectations when you're doing these activities. Like, how do we appropriately respond to one another? What's expected in when I'm walking around and, quiet feet and no talking and those kinds of things. So you do need to do that, but that is Chalkboard Splash. The next type of TPT is called holdups. These are really fun. You've probably done some of these already in your classroom, but this allows for, it's an interactive response. But then the important piece is the discussion. And so there's a bunch of different types of holdups they talk about. I'm sure we've all done whiteboard holdups, or a lot of people have, and that's the picture that you see there, where you ask students to tell you something, they write it on the whiteboard and they hold it up, which is great because that's good formative information for you. But you want to take it a step further and have them discuss, well, why did you answer that? And, oh, I see two different answers. So why do we think we have those different answers? The one that I want to talk about is true, not true holdups. And so the structure for holdups works exactly the same for all of them. So you ask them to think about a prepared question, but before holding up their answer, let them talk in groups or with a partner. Okay, I think this is what it is. I think, and have them think about that. Then have them hold it up and explain their rationale. Why did they choose that answer? So that's how you get the higher order thinking. They're explaining it, but you want to talk about differences that you see in the answers, and maybe there's a chance to sway their partners. So you might be thinking, if you want to use this, think of an upcoming review that you're going to do, or something that you want to get what they think out in this interactive way. So the true, not true. The nice thing about the book is it includes these templates that you can use. And so this is one, you'd print this on cardstock and cut these apart. So every student has these 4 cards for true, not true. And I did this again with my student teachers, and we were talking about code of ethics, and we did scenarios. And I wanted them to tell me when I read a scenario, they had to tell me, is this a violation of the code of ethics? And so they could hold up true or not true, but I love the options that they include. True with modifications, meaning this could be true if a few things changed, or if, there was a couple other things in play, or unable to determine based on information learned. So that's a fair point of, we don't have enough information to know if it's true or not true. So when they held up their answers, then I had students share, well, I see you said it was true. Explain to me why. Well, I see that you said that it's true with modifications. What modifications would you need? And then they debated back and forth, trying to sway one another to change their answer. So it was really powerful, and it was really fun that they were able to do that. So that's a way to get them to articulate their thinking and discuss together. The next one is TPDs involving movement. So we all like to get our students up and moving. And so there's a bunch that you can do there. And I've tried a few of those in my classroom. And again, some of the ones like mouth it, air right, show me on fingers are great for your younger students. Acting it out is a great one as well for younger students. I'm going to talk about lineups, and it's lineups or concentric circles. And so this is a picture that you can see of how this looks. But what you do is you prepare a question that they're going to discuss, and you ask them either 2 parallel lines or concentric circles. So a small circle and a larger circle, and they're facing one another. Each student then, with the person they're facing, they take a turn saying, here's how I responded to the prompt. Then you ring a bell, and either one side of the line moves down one person, or one circle shifts one person. So then they have a new person to talk to and share again what they talked about. And you can intersperse opportunities for them after they share to ask each other a question, to even go even further than that. My students, when we did this, and then we talked about why is this a good instructional strategy, they said it's really good because I'm explaining information to someone multiple times. And so it helps, it's like teaching to somebody else. It helps cement that information for me. And then I get to work with multiple people. And so it's a good collaboration opportunity, and they get to connect big ideas. So you might already have a question prompt that instead of doing a quick write, they could do something like this. So they're up, they're moving, they're talking, but they're still explaining and they're thinking with one another. There are other ones that I won't go into super specifically, but they have ones that address note-taking and concept analysis. So graphic organizers, picture notes, which are great for younger students, pause, star, rank. The debate team carousel is really fun. I've had a teacher use that when I was an administrator, of taking a concept and they rotate through. At one point, they state their opinion, then the next person has to write down an opposing opinion, then the next person has to add to that what was written. So it's constantly being passed around. So that's a really great one. They have some to do during read alouds, which are really, really great. The wrapping it up, those are all about summarizing their learning. So great things to do for like exit tickets. I did the IQ cards last week when I was presenting to a group. The IQ card is an insight and a question. So on an index card, they write one insight, one takeaway from their learning, and then one question that they still have. You have them stand in a circle. They don't have their names on it yet. They pass them down a few people, so it just gets them mixed up. And then you read the card and pass it to the next person. Read the card, pass it until you get your card back. So you get to see what are everybody's insights, what are some questions, and then you can talk about the questions as a group. Overall, all of these provide you some really good formative assessment. You get to see their thinking. It's a visual representation of where they're at, so that can inform your instruction. These last two, they were on mentioned on some of the movement TPTs, but these are two that I wanted to really highlight as well. And they're really great for collaboration. I use, and I've used for some years, this concept of appointment partners. This is the template they have with younger students. You can do clock partners where you have the face of a clock and spots at each hour to write names. And what this does is it provides an opportunity for them to work with different people, but they have some choice in who those people are. So I don't know about you, but I know if I just say find a partner, they're always going to go find their friend. And sometimes we need to have them branch out and talk to other people. So with the appointment cards, what you have them do is you have them go around and you go up, would you be my 8 a.m. partner? Sure. And they write each other's names in that slot. And you do that for each hour. Then when I want to have them work with a partner, I say, please find your 4 p.m. partner and talk about, and then they get with that person. And I usually don't let them repeat a person unless we just can't avoid it. But it provides them with a list of people that they've approached, that they've collected, so they feel a level of okay with that person, but it's not the same person all the time. So that's a really good way to partner people up. The other one is the bounce card. This is really good for teaching discussion, but it can also be used in that chalkboard splash when they're writing a response to someone. So they can learn how to bounce an idea off someone or springboard off someone else's idea. So that reminds me of, or I agree with you because, oh, another example was, okay, they can also sum up or rephrase what somebody said. Okay, so if I understand you, this is what you're saying. I like how you said, and going from there. Or they can ask a question. Tell me more about, or what about this? Have you thought about? And so this is a great way to give them sentence stems to teach them how to discuss and talk about each other's ideas with one another. So it's great because you can print it out and put it on, like tape it on desks or have it in a little kit that they have at their stations or things like that. So a couple of great things that I've used for collaboration purposes. So overall, these, I love them because they are easy to use. You're getting demonstration of learning from everyone and their cognitive engagement. And then it does have them do deeper thinking and requires more of that processing in all of these that they have in the book. So last piece for your engagement, what's something we've discussed that you might want to try next week? Something that stuck out to you. This is either your kind of like IQ. What's your insight? What's your one piece that you want to take away and maybe try?
The ripple method, Knight
Mm-hmm.
writes in there. Yeah. And there's so many things that we can utilize to get that ripple method and the focus on getting students up and moving around and thinking and connecting with other people around them that way. The chalkboard, splash, moth, monad, the ripple method, heba, lineups. Yeah, some of these you can tell, Dr. Jennifer, that they're elementary teachers. They know that those kindergarten through grade three students really need to get up and move around.
Yeah. Yeah.
The TPS strategy, the Let's see the lineups. Yeah, a lot of people want to try the lineups. I think that's good. And maybe what to do is just take one or two of these things and try it out and see how it works. You may have to try it a few times to get it right.
Yeah.
Um, the TPT, yeah, a lot of good thoughts with these. Everyone posting up here.
Well, and I know one question sometimes is, well, some of these seem like they're just geared towards older students.
Mm.
Actually, the way you can do these, they're usable kindergarten up through university level. And they talk about in their book how they use them because they both taught at a university and use them with those students. They also have seen them used in primary grades, middle school. So you can find ways, and they talk about in the book different ways to utilize them no matter what the age group, which is great.
So in a workshop, that's what you started off by saying that if you were doing this in face-to-face workshop, you'd be having the teachers actually practice these as adults to see how they could utilize this themselves in the classroom.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's awesome. So that at this point, then I just have time for any questions. I'm happy to answer.
But do you want to answer those questions after we wrap up
Yeah,
with the words of wisdom, and then we'll post the survey link, and then there's usually a few people that are
perfect.
brave enough to turn on their cameras and raise their hands or post in the chat. It doesn't matter. Um,
Sure, sounds good.
yeah, good. Well, yeah, and this is where usually Dr. Ray comes in. He's so famous for his words of wisdom. And as he was probably basking on the beaches of Hawaii, he sent me a text message. And he said this has been going through his mind. And remember, Dr. Ray is, I don't know if I should say it, but I usually brag for him because he's 83 years old, doesn't look like it. We've traveled all over the world together, and he's still actively thinking of ways he can serve others and help people. And he sent me this quote that's famous, and it says, quote, teachers who love teaching teach students to love learning. Think about that. Teachers who love teaching teach students to love learning. And my challenge to you is sometimes we don't love teaching all the time. But at the core, that's why we get into what we're doing. And we need to consistently evaluate ourselves, find ways to love our teaching, change up our methods sometimes, and that in turn will get students to love learning. And also at the core of that is to build that relationship. And for some people it's a love for our students that we work with. And when you do love your students, you're going to love your teaching, and in turn they will love learning and they will love you. And I promise you, when you do that, you'll be so much happier when you get your whole heart and soul into teaching, into your students' lives, and wanting to help and support them. Education is a very, very difficult profession. You go to bed at night, you're thinking about your students, you're thinking about the lessons and what you can do to prove and grow and develop. There's very few careers, I think, out there that it can be so consuming. And so I commend you for loving your teaching, loving your students, and helping them to love learning. So thank you again. And Dr. Jennifer, thank you so much. This was excellent. I already have the book. I put the link in the chat on where you could purchase it. I apologize that it's Amazon. I know it's easy to find, but I'm going to order it myself. I have heard of it. I have flipped through it, and now I'm really excited to be able to own it and be able to learn a little bit more from its lessons. So thank you again. And with that, I'm going to post in the chat the workshop survey. Please make sure that you fill that out. Certificates will be sent out on Wednesday, your time. It's Tuesday night, my time. I will also put in the chat the PowerPoint link. So please, you can get in there and you can download that PowerPoint, because this is an excellent PowerPoint to refer to. Even if you don't buy the book, you could still, because we're not pushing to buy the book. You absolutely don't have to, but get in and look at some of the concepts that are taught in the book that you can immediately implement. So yes, Moath, please make sure that you get in and fill out that certificate of participation link. Um, Monad writes, highly appreciating the really fruitful presentation. And someone earlier wrote, best presentation that they've seen. And I think that this is a good example too, Dr. Jennifer, of This isn't like sitting down for 8 hours during the day. This is 45 minutes intense learning that you can take a tool and you can put it right into your classroom. So if anyone has
Yes.
questions, please, you can raise your hands and we'll let you unmute yourself and um, and pick the brain of Dr. Jennifer. And like Dr. Mike says, pick out one strategy and try it out, implement it. Mohammed asks Dr. Jennifer, how often should we use these strategies, or should it be all the time that we're using these strategies? And that probably goes back to your different quadrants, but I will leave that to you to answer.
Yeah, you know, I think we should try to incorporate, I mean, whether you're elementary or secondary, if you can even incorporate something small within each lesson, it doesn't have to be, some of these do take more preparation and more time. I would say you don't have to do those every single day, but there are some smaller ones like the quick writes that I do, and an opportunity just to discuss that those don't take a lot of time and it still gets them processing information. Again, I think you have to look at what's the purpose of your lesson at that time, and then what might make the most sense to see, is there a strategy I could use? Even just a TPT holdup. Those are really easy to implement. An opportunity to get up, use the appointment partners, and have them get up and walk around. And when the music stops, stop with your neighbor. And here's the bounce card statements you're going to use. Some of them are very quick and easy. So I think if you could try to do like in elementary, a couple a day, in secondary, if you have class periods, try to get at least something in to each class period where they are cognitively processing that information in a deeper way, if that makes sense for the lesson.
Great question too. I love how we talk about how this can be utilized not just for primary grades, elementary grades, but it can be used that you use it in your college classes.
I do.
Well, let me give you a good example of that. When I taught the intro class that Jennifer now teaches, Dr. Jennifer teaches,
Uh-huh.
every class session, I used a different strategy
Wow.
to teach. And that way the students became aware of them, but they also got to participate in them as they were learning. So we generally would have, I'm not sure, Jennifer, how many sessions you have now with those classes. I think I used to have 8 or 9 because they had the field experience that went along with it. But every class we would talk about, I would use the strategy in the class as I taught. And then at the end, we would talk about that strategy and why it works, or sometimes I would use one that doesn't work very well and show them why it doesn't work very well. So, especially the large group instruction when compared to small group, for example. But that's one of the ways that it does work with graduate students and undergraduate students and high school, middle school, elementary. You just have to pick the strategy. But the key thing is to remember that you can't just do it exactly the same as somebody else. You have to use the ones that fit you, the way you teach, and your personality. Because if you try to do something that doesn't fit you, it's not going to go over very well.
One question that we have is, does this work in large groups? Probably because some of these classes are 30 students or more.
Yeah, and that's a great question. And that's where some of that establishing of the routines and procedures associated with some of these, especially if you're using movement ones, is super important. I have used them in when I taught high school. One of my class periods was 34 students, and I used chalkboard splash in there. And I had poster paper up because I didn't have whiteboards all around my room. And but I had set the expectation and established how were you to move about the room, what voice level should I hear, which was none. What should it look like as you respond? What length am I expecting on the response? So all of that did have to be set up and communicated really clearly, but they were able to do it and move around. And honestly, they really enjoyed it because I think at high school, they tend to get into a mode of thinking they're just going to sit and listen. And so when we had those opportunities like that, they really enjoyed it because it was different, and it got them up and moving, and they were able to do something more interactive. And so I have done it with big groups. You just have to set your expectations and procedures really well.
That's great. Great answer. There's another question in the survey. Someone asked, what do you do with students that are hyperactive or have behavior issues? How can you make sure, because you're asking them to get up and move around, and maybe you already addressed that a little bit with making sure that the procedures are planned out. But any other thoughts or ideas on how we can control those troublemakers, as someone wrote, hyperactive students, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I think again, they a lot of times, well, all students need explicit instruction in expectations. And so, but for your hyperactive students or some that struggle a little bit more with those like boundaries of behavior during more interactive group things, you're going to need to probably set some specific boundaries with them and let them know, okay, this is, as we are doing this, you need to make sure that you're only going here, 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 and just be really explicit with it and then reinforce your those expectations and follow through if they aren't following them, and making sure to have the conversation then about, okay, what do we do next time in order that this can follow through in a really good way and you can participate with us, because you do want them participating. They have just as many great thoughts to share. They just might need some more structured and directed guidance as they're doing it.
Do you think that it actually could reduce behaviors because you're getting students up and learning, they're engaged, because some students get bored, and
Right,
this is a way that they can their mind and their body can be moving around a little bit more too.
right. I do. And I mean, that to me is a foundational piece of engagement. It's supposed to engage them enough where those behaviors do reduce. And so again, it's not perfect. You're going to have your outliers with behaviors, but a lot of times with these as well, they're not real long things that you're doing either. None of them are sit for 20 minutes and respond to this prompt or things like that. So it's really kind of quick things that help them. Let's get our thoughts, then let's move, then let's sit back down, let's discuss. So you're kind of transitioning through things, not in a way that's too fast where they can't process, but it keeps it moving and the pacing really nice so that ideally you don't deal with those behaviors as much.
And maybe the last question, because we've had a lot of people already post their survey response, but Syed writes in the chat, if what do you do when students are just not interested in being engaged? You have all these cool activities, you want them to get up and moving, but they just don't want to be engaged.
Yeah, I think that connects. That's a really good question, and that's a very real challenge because you have those students that the different types of disengagement. Um, there's a willful disengagement of I don't want to do this. You're not going to make me do this. Then there's just the disengagement of I'm distracted or I'm, a butterfly over here or whatever the case may be. So I think if you have your student that's like, I'm out, I don't want to do this, part of what we have to do is get to looking at the why that's happening. There is a root cause, and it goes into, it could have to do with some of those basic needs. They just may be completely fried and don't want to have to do any more thinking because they didn't eat enough. And so their brain isn't wanting to function, or they're lacking sleep. Or it may be a fact that they don't feel comfortable with the information. And so they don't want to put themselves out there. The great thing with that is that a lot of these provide some very like low impact ways for them to enter the learning, low risk ways that they hopefully can see, oh, I can do that part. I'll at least do this little piece, and then it'll hook them in and hopefully get them going. But essentially, we have to uncover the why are they wanting to disengage and then address it from there.
Love it. Yeah, just excellent, excellent thoughts. Um, And I think those are all the questions, but we may have to have like an addendum to this at some point and follow up, because I think there have been so
Sure.
many great comments and thoughts and feedback. Dr. Jennifer, we appreciate you coming on, and thank you everyone for participating and your questions and your comments. Thank you again, Dr. Mike. It's always a pleasure to have you on here, and you have such awesome people that you've mentored over the years and supported. And many people who are here have been benefited from your mentorship, and I'm sure Dr. Jennifer would say the same thing.
Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And everyone have a good evening or a good start of your day, wherever you're at. Appreciate it and appreciate seeing everyone, and good luck in trying out these new strategies in your classroom. Go and love your students and love your teaching.
Thank you all.
Thank you.